Lämmin tervehdys kaikille Dataa ja kiekkoa podcastin ystäville ympäri maailman ja tänään jos koskaan voimme puhua kansainvälisyyden nimissä. Minä olen Tuomas Nyholm, liigan viestintäjohtaja ja aion nyt vaihtaa Dataa ja kiekkoa ohjelman juontokielen englanniksi syystä, jonka ymmärrätte aivan hetken kuluttua. Welcome to our podcast, Mr. Blaine Patterson from Sportlogiq company. Honored to have you here and honored to have you in Finland.
No, thank you so much. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. I wish maybe it was a little warmer or a little lighter outside, but it's absolutely a pleasure to be here on the podcast. Appreciate you having me.
This is Finland. Get used to it if you're going to be coming here more and more. And we also have Jukka, the CDO of Liiga. Welcome to the show again, my colleague.
Thank you. I think it's the 8th time now.
Yeah. So we're talking about today, of course, about data and hockey. And because of that, Blaine is here. So first, we might start about your company and your role in it. What do you do for a living?
Yeah, so I work for a company called Sportlogiq. We're based out of Montreal, Canada. Being a Canadian company, obviously they're really big into hockey. It's a computer vision machine learning company that specializes in the automation of data collection. So a lot of fancy words, AI, computer vision, machine learning, and really all we're trying to do is advance the way that data is collected in sport. My role in the company is to run all commercial development, so business development, all of our sales, and everything that would have to do around the commercial business of sport and sport technology. The history of Sportlogiq, like I said, being a Canadian company, they started in ice hockey, just because it's the national sport of Canada.
The natural choice, yeah.
The natural choice, but really interesting enough, our CEO was a figure skater. So he was a professional athlete. He competed in the Olympics, and he was on the ice, but he always joked he wore sequins and not pads. Mm-hmm. But when he went to get his master's degree, he ran into Marsan Javan, who's our co-founder, and their initial goal was to just look at how they could maximize computer vision and machine learning. And the first thought they had was self-driving cars. Like, how can we get into the auto industry? How can we look at using this technology into self-driving cars? What they quickly realized is they know absolutely nothing about the auto industry, but they know a lot about sport. So they really changed paths relatively quickly and looked at how this type of technology can be used to automate a lot of data collection that you either can collect today by hand, but it's really costly and timely, or collect data that couldn't be collected at all just by the human eye.
So what's the timeline of all this? When did it start?
Yeah, it started 7 years ago. And really, it was just with one hockey team. It was one team that said, "Hey, look, if you can produce this type of data for us, we're interested in a pilot." They gave us, the first check. It was much smaller than what they pay today, and we went to investors. This is before I was there. They went to investors and really just showed that there was a demand and a need for more data in hockey. I would say that hockey was probably the third or fourth league to really get into deep data, where, baseball and Moneyball started it all. And then the NBA came in pretty quickly and the NFL jumped on board with the next-gen stats. And hockey kind of trailed behind. But I would say now hockey is right there with anybody as far as the type of data that's collected and used.
So at this point, I'd like to ask Jukka, how do you fit in the picture? Me and Blaine, we can talk about this quite a long. But what's your status? Why are we talking here today together?
Yeah, I guess the hint is in the title that I have. So Chief Digital Officer, that comes with everything within digital space, more or less. And what we've been actually doing together with Jussi Markkanen, our GM or sporting director, is we've been evaluating different kind of options of how to kind of make good decisions about our ecosystem when it comes to how do we collect stats from our games, how do we get better analytics tools for our teams and that sort of things. And one tech partner that we are looking at is Sportlogiq, and that's why Blaine is here. And
they're looking really closely at.
We're really happy to have you here. So international perspective, and we've been talking about from the Finnish standpoint and the Liiga standpoint, but during the Data and Hockey podcast, which it is in English, we've been talking about the international side of things, how are things going on in different leagues abroad. And of course, we look at the North American market and NHL as a, how would you put it, as the...
Well, it's the kind of golden star, like the one that we kind of look at, that's where we should be, kind of that sort of...
But not to say that we haven't taken good and big steps towards data in hockey, in Finnish also.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So mirroring what you said, we're not going to the deepest end of data today.
That's perfect because I can't get there if we want to. So we need to stay at the surface.
The big picture. So when you started with what you are doing right now, what was the technology and where do you get your data from?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Really where it started was just with the technology itself. So computer vision, there's two separate pieces, computer vision and machine learning, which make up kind of AI. But computer vision is the ability to take images from a screen and turn that into actual data. So the easiest thing to understand really is you want to look at something like tracking data. You want to know where players are on the ice at all times. Well, computers now actually can be trained to say, okay, we know the size of the rink. We know where the players are. And from that, you can derive metrics like your speed, your player location. And then you start to get a bigger understanding of, you know there was a shot taken, but we also now know the location of the shot. We know the location of the defender. And then we can start to apply those to create something with machine learning like an XG model. So expected goals are something that's talked about all the time. But what goes into an expected goals model is, there's 40 or 50 data points that maybe you wouldn't use individually, but a computer can now look at those and compute those together and say, okay, this is a good shot. It's a good shot because of the location of the shot, the location of the defense, the timing of the pass and the shot. And it takes into a lot more than just, oh, well, it looks like a good shot because he's wide open. That's not really what we're looking at anymore. There's a lot more that goes into it. And because it's done through machine learning, that model changes by itself over time. So if right now the inner slot is the place where you really want to get to, and we're seeing that the most goals are scored when they're taken from that inner slot, well, over time, coaches then start to work to defend that inner slot. So if the defense becomes better and now all of a sudden the highest ranking shots come from one side or the other versus a specific goalie even, that expected goals model will change. So computer vision will allow you to start to capture some of the data, but the machine learning will start to tell you why that data is important and how that model can shift over time without, if Yuka or I were to sit there and say, okay, over the last 1,000 games, what's the most effective shot against a goalie? We would never be able to come up with what a computer can do in seconds because they're going to say, okay, 5 years ago, the best place to shoot against this goalie was the upper right corner. Well, that goalie now knows that, so what are they going to work on? They're going to work on defending that upper right corner. So as they do that, then now the model has to shift because as you defend one area, you're starting to open something else up and that model changes. So the ability for computers to take in that data really affects how it's used. Yeah.
One thing that I want to maybe add on that is more about the kind of how the data is collected, because we did have Ice-Hockey here in our previous podcast, and their technology is different compared to Ice-Hockey. So what Ice-Hockey does, it basically listens. It's a radio kind of signal thing, so that it can hear with the tags that players have and the puck has, and then it has the sensors on the ring. They are using it. They're using computer vision that can look at the video, so like TV broadcasting or things like that, and make basically like data points from that video. That's the kind of data collection part of it.
Right. So there's no tags on players. There's no hardware that's put in the facilities. We're literally taking a camera feed from a broadcast or a tactical feed, and the computer is recognizing patterns on screen and turning that into actual data.
Could you put it this way, as a simple model, that Ice-Hockey has ears and you have eyes?
Yes.
It's a really interesting way to put it, but yeah, good. I like that.
Oh,
I'm going to steal that one, actually. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, you can do that. $7.
You're going to learn fast that I'm really good at repeating what other people say and not actually knowing what it means. So that's a perfect way to put it.
Won't be a problem for me. So you get all that from the picture. Do you have any sensor technology involved?
No sensor technology. It just comes down to what we can see. And because of the machine learning piece, again, we've got the two parts, what the computer sees and what the computer can learn and tell itself. So now we actually have models because we have so many games that tell us what players typically do on the ice when they're not on picture. We can now actually estimate that data as well. So yes, we started in hockey, but now we're working in soccer, European football, and then American football as well. And if there's now a view where a player is on the pitch and we see them and the camera moves and we don't see them anymore, 20 seconds later the camera sees them again, we now can estimate where they would have probably run during that time off screen. So we know that more than likely a player's not sitting there running in circles for 20 seconds. They're probably going from point A to point B in some pattern that's recognized from all the different games we put in. And so now we can recognize and get data from not only what we see, but what we think probably happened when they weren't on screen.
That kind of anticipation probably works pretty well for American football, but how does it work for hockey? Does it work for hockey?
Same thing. So if you see a skater on one side of the ice and we know that they're transitioning from the defensive to the offensive end, and let's say they're just off screen for a little bit, more than likely we know they're going from point A to point B. They're not going to just sit there and like go back and forth. They're usually trying to get from one place to the next, and we can estimate based off of historical pattern to say, okay, look, when a transition happens and there's a turnover in the defensive or the neutral zone and we know they're going to the offensive zone, everybody's transitioning from the defensive to the offensive zone. So the second we pick them up with the camera, again, we can say, okay, we have an idea of what they probably did in that time. It's never going to be as accurate as seeing them on screen, but we can now get that estimate so there are no gaps in the data.
How much of a consideration is the individual who is doing the effort on the ice, for example, taking the shot? Do you take consideration about who is giving the shot?
100%. Yeah, because not only do you recognize just the patterns, again, the computer vision model is recognizing the pattern, but the machine learning model is saying, okay, this player, we know they're right-handed. We know they often score more from a certain side of the ice. We know they're better at certain sides of the face-off. And that player's historical data is also taken into context. And we can use as much data as we have. So now going on 8 seasons, we have players that have been in the NHL the entire time that we've been collecting data, and our accuracy is going to be a lot higher in predicting what they're going to do because of the historical data that we have on them.
Yeah, and the more you have, the more accurate you will be, and the more you can ask from the system. Does it work like that? The more you get data, the more you can ask specific or more complicated questions.
Yeah, and then the thing is with machine learning as well, though, is yes, we have data on somebody. Let's say Sidney Crosby. Sidney Crosby was a different player 8 years ago than he is today. He's aging. Computers can't take that into account until we have now seasons of historical data to say, okay, we know a player when they're 30 years old versus 34 years old, we know that there's a decline. And they can start to recognize that as well. But that's going to take even 10 more years for us to really understand the cycle of a player's career. So right now, we're not really even recognizing that because we don't have enough data to say, okay, we have an entire career for Sidney Crosby, because we don't.
So you need like a generation.
But that is going to start to change where, players, you see them get better as they're young and they're growing, but then at some point they are going to start to decline. And that's the part that really has to take in a lot more data.
Right.
That's unbelievably interesting.
Yeah, it is. And now thinking like, well, not yet, but like when it has enough data, it can probably start to also see how the game is changing. So it's taking into account that players are getting older, so they are kind of, their behavior is different, but also the game behavior can be different, and it needs to take that into account as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a term in hockey, but in basketball we have one that you got the old man game, where you start to use your body, you start to get a little smarter, you're not as explosive, you're not as fast, but you're a little shifty, or you have ways to use your body and move in ways that you're right. You start to see those changes in the game and the way they're playing.
We're going to take a 7-second break, and then we're going to continue, sirs. Welcome back, everybody, to Data and Hockey podcast, which is in Finnish, Dataa and Kiekkoa, but we're doing it today with English because we have Blaine Patterson from Sportlogiq today, and Joka, of course, also here. We've been talking about your company and the technology you're using, and you mentioned several times AI and machine learning. You said 7 years your company been running approximately. I'd anticipate that the development has been huge and really fast for the last few years. What was it like when you started?
So I wasn't there when the company started, but even in the time that I've been there, so I've been there now a little over 4 years. I started in October of 2019. The speed at which things move is incredibly impressive to watch. Just over the course of 1 or 2 years, when I got there, we were specifically focused on just hockey data. And it was just hockey data at the highest level at the NHL. And then our ability to scale down market. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we went into a partnership with a company called LiveBarn. And LiveBarn is a streaming company that focuses on youth hockey. So again, I got there in 2019. The only thing we were focused on was the NHL, and we had the Swedish Hockey League as well. at no point did we think we could start producing data at that time at the youth level. Well, over time, as we had more reps, as we had more games, as we taught the computers what we were looking for, we now could go down market and we can take a youth stream, and a parent wants to go in and you go, let's say you want to watch your kid play, but you have work, you're a busy man, you can't make it to the game, but you want to be able to watch their shifts and see when they're on the ice, and you don't want to spend an hour and a half watching it. We now have the ability for them to go into Live Barn, say, okay, here's when my kid played a game. It was from 6 to 7:30. I just want to see when my kid's on the ice. You click a button, you pay your fee, and then a parent gets back in less than an hour a video of just their kid's time on ice with a little arrow over their head. So now they can watch their kid without having to spend an hour and a half, and they can go and talk about what they've done. So the automation of data, and if you're to look at the video, you're not going to think that there's data behind it. But in order to understand that this is when your kid is on the ice, we have to recognize first the player. So we've got to be able to take the jersey and recognize who the player is. And then we have to recognize when they're coming on the ice, when they're going off the ice. So there's data in the background driving these videos to automate youth sports for parents to be able to watch just their kids' time on ice. And then after that, we can also give them a report that says, this is where your kid spends the majority of their time on the ice. So there's a heat map that says, okay, you spend the majority of your time in the offensive zone here, the neutral zone here, and then the defensive zone here. And we can actually take that and we can compare that to NHL players and say, okay, this is a player that you're playing like based off of where you're spending your time on the ice. Mm-hmm. So the evolution from highest level NHL only data to now a youth market that there would be no way to collect that type of data manually because the cost would be way too high for the hundreds of thousands of players that are on the ice. So it's pretty cool to see.
At the speed that the AI words have been coming to a common news feed, we're talking about AI in every context nowadays, but you've been working it for a while. Do you have to focus on a specific area where you, toward your development to, or do you just spread your wings like, let the AI learn everything, or do you focus on different areas?
Yeah, so as a company grows, we've had to focus more and more, and a lot of that has to do with the commercial opportunities. Yeah. So where can, as a business, every business needs to make money. Where can we find opportunities that there's a need and there's a commercial application for it where people are willing to actually pay? So really starting now, we're focusing more on what do people want? The biggest thing is really automation of events. So the first thing we did was we automated the player location. And now, especially looking at the youth market, okay, that's great that you have a video of just my kids when they're on the ice. But now the next thing parents are saying is, okay, I want a video of every time my kid takes a shot. So that automation and the ability to auto-detect events is really where this is starting to go. And that's the holy grail is if you can start automating those events, then that's where people really want to see this data collection grow, because the more you can automate, I mean, even with our NHL product, like we are teaching computers what a shot is. And there's always going to be some error potentially with computers because computers can't assume anything. Everything is black and white. It's a shot or it's not a shot. But if there's a shot that, as the human eye, they're taking a shot, but they miss so badly that it goes, 10 feet off the net, and there's 3 people standing on the other side of that net, the computer is going to probably assume it's a really hard pass because it wasn't in the direction of where you would typically take a shot. So there's some ambiguity that the computer can't really decipher because they're saying, okay, you're telling me a shot needs to be going towards the net. It needs to be at a certain speed. And as a human, we can still detect those things. So we're teaching that to then take that down market to automate those type of events.
And I think that's like coming back to like what we've been discussing with Ice Hockey, for example. Like, computer has definite definitions. Yeah, human eye can detect like the gray areas there, like where actually was this a shot or was this not a shot? Those sort of things. But actually, coming back, like you've been mentioning NHL now a couple of times here. Like, can you kind of give a little bit of background and how did you start with NHL and how many NHL teams are you working with now and things, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started, like I said, with just one NHL team, and it came out of an idea that then snowballed into, I know right now we work with 31 NHL teams. And at the time, our focus was NHL, but in the past 3 years, we've really shifted to that. Now that there's more automation, now that the data collection is going to become more cost effective, we can get down market. So we have 31 NHL teams that we use for our NHL product. Then we have scouting products where we're capturing data down market. So we've got over 40 teams in the Canadian Hockey League. We've got 29 of the 32 or 30 of the 32 AHL teams using it. And then we started going into the NCAA market. And then in Europe, we've got the entire Swedish Hockey League, Hockey Allsvenskan, the second division, and we're actually working with the third division as well, Hockey Etten. And it really shows the difference in capabilities now because the SHL, they want live data. So we're producing everything with a 5-minute delay post-period. Hockey Allsvenskan then, budget was more of a concern at the time, and we're looking to change that. But they have 12-hour turnaround. So they get our data, but in 12 hours. And it has nothing to do with the time it takes to collect the data. It has to do with the time it takes to quality assure the data. So we still have to have humans checking over the work that the computers do. And that takes time, but the more people you throw at it, the higher the cost. And then the third division, Hockey Etten, they don't need all the data. All they really want to see is when players are on the ice. So in the third division, all we're collecting is that shift data so that coaches can go in and watch specific shifts for their players and specific shifts for certain lines. And that's all they needed. So we've got 3 really different offerings in the SHL versus what we're doing in the NHL where everything is live for every team.
So are you working with NHL or individually with the teams? 31, so there's what's going on with the one?
There's one left, and we're not sure what's going on there, but we're trying hard to make it 32. We're hoping this is the year. But yeah, we work directly with the teams. The one thing that's a little different in North America is those leagues usually don't make league-wide agreements for the type of data used, but we've seen that shifting a little bit, where the NHL is starting to get more involved in understanding what the team's needs are. But typically, they allow the teams to make those decisions. But we do have an agreement that we work with the league on other things, especially on the media side. So there's multiple agreements.
And how is this compared to like NHL launched NHL Edge? That thing, which is, if I understand right, is like the infrared kind of technology. That I know it's used at least on the TV broadcast and things like that. But are you using it? Are teams using it? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So SMT actually is, I would say, the comparable to Wise Hockey, where they're putting chips on players and they're using that data live for entertainment purposes, and they're doing that to automate a lot of really fast data. So with speed, you sometimes can lose a little bit of accuracy, and they try to tie that together with their hits data to really clean that up. NHL has done a phenomenal job of really pushing the envelope on data collection. And then we actually work with them and Sportradar to launch the Edge website, which we're really excited to have launched a couple months ago, where they actually are giving fans access to that fast, live, chip-collected data, which no other league has ever done before. So fans can actually go in now and they can start to see some of the speeds on ice, some of the different speeds on shots, some of the different locations of shots based off of the chip in the puck and then the sensors on the players. So yeah, it's really cool to see that Edge website launch for the first time. Where there's the whole Twitterverse of people, or now it's X, where there's people out there that are just data people, and they've been dying to get their hands on this data for so long, and no league has done it until the NHL said, you know what, we're going to let you have your hands on it, and people immediately took it and started running their own analysis and doing their own kind of deep data dives. I'm personally not one of them, obviously, but there are people out there doing it.
But it starts a whole another new ecosystem of hockey talk, and it brings another level. No matter if it's not the deepest yet, it goes deeper and deeper, of course, during time. But it adds another layer, which hasn't existed before.
Yeah. It does, and what it's really doing is it's getting fans to understand what data analytics is. Yeah. People think that data analytics, they hear the words and they, like me, I would be terrified if I thought data analytics was all deep data. We've been looking at data analytics since sport started. You look at a box score, that's data, that's analytics. Like it's just how deep can you go? And what a website like Edge does on the NHL is it starts teaching kids at an early age what data can be collected and what data can be used and what should they be looking at as a player to try to help develop. So I think just the fact that they're giving people the ability to see this type of data, it's going to open their eyes, and younger generations are going to start to understand how that data can be used for their benefit.
Yeah, and just to kind of on that, I've been talking about this internally and actually in these broadcasts as well, that even though the data collection should be kind of more or less the same, or it creates problems if you have different data sources if you don't connect them. But I think there are different use cases, and because that there needs to be different roadmaps when it comes to like to the entertainment side of sports or hockey, and then the sports side of hockey. And that's important to understand, because in here, when we're talking about the entertainment side, that means that we need to have standardized stats. And then there's a really big benefit of getting those in real time at scale. In some cases on the sports side, the real time is not exactly what is needed, but the quality of that data needs to be really accurate. And that can create kind of different kind of needs and contradictions even between these two.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the entertainment side and the hard hockey side. Do you see that contradiction? How do you see that kind of categorization? Is it a valid one? The data points are probably the same, but...
Absolutely, it's valid. And we've always focused on the team side, but we have a huge media department as well that works with pretty much every broadcaster in North America. And then we work with Seymour as well in Sweden. And what we're producing for entertainment is like a pregame report. It's automated based off data, but it actually will write out a report that just talks in normal language about what should be expected in the upcoming game based off of all the data that we collect. So pregame, between periods, infographics, like data can automate all these things for broadcast. But when you start talking about in-game live, so if you want to know how many face-offs were won in a specific zone in the first period, that's something that you would need to have that fast live data to really keep you up to date on. We're not really focused on that piece of it. What we're looking at is, here's the things you should look at throughout the game. Between period, we can analyze and say, okay, here are the things that were good. Mm-hmm. But that you listen to a broadcast and it's like every 15 seconds something new is being brought up that has recently happened. And fans want that, and broadcasters need that information to be able to have something for it. So our focus really is on the quality and on the team side. But with that data, like I said, we have a ton of information that we can produce for broadcast, but it's not going to be that in-game, here's what's going on in the last 10 minutes of the period. But we're going to be able to look at it period by period by period. Mm-hmm.
And when we look to the future, which is obviously easy and fun to do, but the more time goes by, the more people learn about these things, and the more eager they are to get the info, and the more they can digest it fast speed. Now we talk about XG, expected goals. It's going to be pretty familiar in Finland, I'd say, next year. Everybody pretty much knows what it is. 2 years ago, what is XG? What are we going to do with this? Where are we going with that? Yeah. So when we get the more and more data to the public eyes, then we get the bar goes lower and lower, how much we can feed them, and we can kind of, the demand creates the market.
Exactly.
So, absolutely. And same thing with teams. Once coaches start to understand expected goals, okay, that might be the first thing that they really start to look at is, are we getting high quality shots? Basically is what coaches want. As they understand it, they need it. They didn't know they needed it 5 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. But now they understand it and they know it, so they need it.
And that goes to the viewer also. They know that they need the info, that we've been using XG for our live score radar, or what it is, the how'd you say it in English?
Game monitoring.
Game monitoring.
Yeah. So, who's going to win? They just see it, but they have no idea that actually has to do with where the expected goals are coming.
They didn't know that it's going to be interesting, and they need it, but now they know. And for me, I'm a kind of not a Luddite, but I'm a guy who doesn't automatically trend towards statistics and data, but I love the XG.
Yeah.
All right, another 7 seconds break, then we're going to come back. Dataa ja kiekkoa normaalisti suomen kielellä, mutta tänään mennään vahvasti englannilla. Jukka Sundqvist, Jaka Sundqvist in English, and Blaine Patterson from Sportlogiq.
I don't know what you just said about us, but I thought we were doing a pretty good job.
I said that we're going to go with English, and then I said Jukka's NHL name, which is Jaka Sundqvist.
Sometimes I use also John McQuist.
Right. That's a topic for another podcast, but now we're going to deep dive to the NHL level a little bit more. So you're working with the teams 31 of 32. How does the approach differ from team to team? Because the cultures and the franchises are really different in NHL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I would say the teams that use it at the highest of high levels versus the teams at the bottom, there's still a pretty big gap. But I wouldn't say that one gets more out of it than the other, because it really comes down to application and how you're trying to use it. So the teams at the highest high level, they're taking the data, they're taking multiple data sources, they're creating their own kind of database in the background that runs the system, and there might be coaches we have a platform called ICE, coaches using that platform ICE, and the data analysts might never once even look at ICE. They're taking raw data, they're combining it, and they're running their own reports and their own queries on the deep data where, the teams, there are other teams that really just want to see how that data is visualized, and they're using our platform solely to really understand what the data means. And like I said, I wouldn't say that one is better than the other, but when you start talking about having a true data analyst, they're not going to be looking at just how the data is visualized. They're really going to be taking that and they're going to be putting into their own database. So I would say that's the biggest difference. Is there's true data analysts at some teams. There's still some teams that don't even have a real data analyst. It's more of someone that's a coach that's looking at data and trying to come up with different strategies based off of it.
Is it fair to kind of say that it goes kind of like this, especially from the scouting point of view, that first you only look at videos, then you look at videos and stats, and then you start to look at almost only data, kind of like that as an evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking about this last night. Jussi and I were, when we just talked about kind of some of the feedback we get from teams. The first thing coaches do is they want to see if it passes the eye test. And what that means is they have a player that they know plays a specific way that they think is either good or bad at specific things, and they're going to look at data and see, does data validate what I see and what I think? So from that middle of the road aspect, it's like, okay, I know what I'm watching. I've been doing this for 30 years. Is the data kind of saying the same thing? If so, I'll start to trust more data. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the people that are like, look, data is king. All I care about is data. And I actually don't want the eyes to confuse what is being said in black and white. And that's where the big conflict actually still comes in with a lot of teams, is you have the people that don't know hockey, but they know data and they know patterns and they know what data says. And they're not even going to watch a game, and they're going to say, hey, look, this is what the data is telling you. And the coach is going to say, I'd watch the game. That is definitely not what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
But that has to be a huge cultural thing in NHL. For example, you have a coach who is charismatic, long career, 17 Stanley Cups, and he has an approach towards data. And you have the company, the franchise, which has one analytics guy who provides data. Mm-hmm. But if you have a franchise decision that we have like 7 guys providing data to your coach, then it becomes a franchise decision, which starts to trend you towards the data point compared to the coach who doesn't give too much credit on that.
Yeah, so it's something we talk about a lot, is how to get buy-in from different people within an organization. Yeah. So a lot of times there's still a little bit of a disconnect where there's management, there's GMs, there's coaches, and there's data analysts. And a lot of times data analyst is brought in to support the GM, not necessarily the coach. And so coaches know that, data analysts know that, and the one thing data analysts want to do is get coaches to buy in, because the last thing they want to do is spend all this time doing it and not having it actually affect what's being done on the ice. So the approach we've talked to a lot of people about is first use data to validate what a coach believes. Like if there's a coach that wants to play a certain style, and you can take the data and you can make it look a way that you go to the coach and say, look, this is what's really positive about the style you're playing. These are the things that you do really well. This is what data says about the way you like to play. And it gets coaches to start to say, okay, data is not always used against me. Data can be used to validate what I already believe. And once you get them to start feeling comfortable that the data is actually showing what you're doing is good, then they start to trust it a little bit more. Right. We're like, okay, you're telling me I'm doing good things. Now, tell me one thing I don't do so well.
And that is the buy-in.
And that's the buy-in. And the second you get them to ask the question, okay, well, what am I not doing well? Now the light goes off, and it's like, okay, you can't tell them 10 things, but you can start with one. And then you go with one thing, say, okay, this line combination that you're playing is really good, except on a power play potentially, or in different situations where if you're in the lead or if it's late in the game, this line doesn't, and you just give them one piece to say, okay, if you just tweak this one piece, or you look at this one player, or you look at this one shift, and you give them one piece to change and to really think about, the buy-in becomes a lot easier. If you just walk in the room the day one and say, okay, coach, here are the 10 things that you're doing wrong according to data, they're going to throw you out the door. They're going to tell you never to come back, and they're never going to listen to a thing that you say. So there's a progression that goes with it. But when you take something that they understand and you show how data supports what they understand, then they're going to start to open their mind up to new ways.
But isn't this, Jukka, the situation in everywhere, for example, in our league?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's what we've been discussing in this podcast, actually, that we should not bring all the data to our consumers or our fans. Yeah. It's just too much. We need to be kind of mindful about what we bring and how we bring and educate while we're doing that. But actually, I want to ask one more question regarding that, because I would imagine that also the kind of the legacy side of the franchise plays a role. Let's put that to a context. The newest team is Las Vegas Golden Knights. Coming up fresh without any kind of legacy, does that kind of play a role? Are they more data savvy because of that or something like that?
So there's no legacy to the team, but there's legacy to the players. And there's still going to be data that the players have, and the data, and those coaches have been around for a long time as well. So yes, you're starting from zero, but you quickly know where the pieces to the puzzle kind of fit. And that's when you start to look at that money ball, which, you know, in baseball it was like, what role can each player play and how can they fit into the puzzle? So they're looking at data different ways, but you're right, they don't have the historical context of how has this team performed. But you know, most teams are changing players yearly anyway, so it's really looking at how those pieces can fit together versus the legacy of the team.
Do you know how much did they use data when they were picking, because they were picking players from other franchises and things like that? Was there some person that was hired or something like that was really looking from the data point of view or anything like that?
Absolutely, but again, data could be something as simple as how many shots a game do they get, and then it's really just comes to how deep they go. But that's really on the management side. So the GMs are really looking at that data from a much deeper perspective, and then they're going to take the coach's opinions to say, okay, you coached against this player. What do you think? You know, there's data points that you don't really get, like toughness. How tough is a guy? And people try to quantify that with data, but reality, coaches know who the tough guys are and who the guys are that can really take a beating and continue to keep playing. So it's twofold. Absolutely, management is a 100% hiring data analysts to just look at the data and say, who fits well in this type of system that we should be drafting. But then there's also going to be that subjectivity that coaches are going to be brought in to use.
Not trying to be an NHL GM, which obviously I have no qualifications, but the expansion draft is probably a little bit more about, okay, who do we get? Do we get some good picks from there? And once we get the bunch here, okay, how is the data side of these guys? What can we do with them? So you got to pick a goalie, you got to get the D-men, you got to get franchise like players if you can from the expansion draft. So it starts from there. But the trend towards data, it has to be pretty fast, the pace, what things are moving in the NHL.
It is, yeah. 4 years ago when I started at Sportlogiq, there was maybe 5 or 6 true data analysts in the NHL. I would say that's tripled in just the last couple of years. I would say every team now has someone at least with a title that is data analyst or something similar. There were maybe 2 or 3 teams when I started that actually had their own internal databases for data collection, and that's quadrupled. I bet there's 12 to 16 teams now that have their own internal databases. So it is going very fast. And one thing we talk about is the difference between North America and Europe. I would say the teams that use data the most at the top, they're probably very similar. You know, there are a few people we talk to here, even in Liga, that they have their own internal databases. They're looking solely at data. They have those people that shut the eyes off and only look at the data. They're not looking at the actual games. So when you're comparing the people at the top in the NHL and the people at the top in Liga, I would say there's not a huge difference. What it is there's a lot more teams at the top using data, and Europe is catching up to that pace at which that accelerates. But if you compare how they use data at the top level, I would say they're very similar.
One thing also about still about the NHL teams actually, and what you just said, is it possible for you to kind of give an example about a franchise that is really data driven? Like who uses data the most? Or
I don't know that they would want us to go out and say who does, but there are definitely teams that base a lot more of their decisions, not only from a drafting perspective, but there are certain teams that really analyze every game and say, okay, we're going to make adjustments as coaches. But I don't know that they'd want us to necessarily go out and say who they are. But there are teams that are absolutely doing more on a daily basis with their data analysts and their coaches, where they're a lot more closely joined. Where there's still some that are they're still trying to get them to take that one piece of data to try to make some decisions and changes.
Couple of words about the future, which is not going to be an easy task, but well, maybe it is. Where does it go? The data side of hockey in 2 years, 3 years, from an NHL standpoint, for example?
I think you're going to start to see a lot more acceptance of the chip tracking data. So right now, teams have access to the data, which, again, we talk about Wise Hockey and the ability to understand where players are at on the ice at all times, how fast they're moving. That data still isn't being maximized. In the NBA, they were the first to have tracking data with a company that was built out of Stats LLC had the first version of it, and now the NBA has gone on. Their third iteration is going to be with Hawkeye. But that data collection, the first time it was collected, everyone thought it was cool. Everyone loved it, but no one knew how to use it. So they paid a lot of money. They didn't get any value, and they stopped using it. And now, over time, they've had to build that back up. Same thing at the NHL. We have all this data on tracking, and we have all these automated data collection pieces, but teams still don't really know how to use it. And a lot of teams are looking to us to try to figure out how should we be looking at it. The first product that we actually launched based off of tracking data, it's going to sound very simple, but it's something coaches have never had before. So right now, coaches only watch the video, and they watch it from that broadcast angle, so it's the side, and you don't see both sides of the ice equally as well. And what we're able to do with tracking data is give them the overview of the ice. So if you were standing right in the middle of the ice up
like a bird
50 meters, the bird eye view down, we can now automate and have all the players just as little dots on the ice moving around. So coaches can get a picture. While they're watching the video, they can also see where all players are moving, at what speed they're moving at all times, and where the puck is located. So it sounds really simple, but that's actually taking a ton of data and visualizing it in a way that people understand. So where I think this is going in the next 2 years is that tracking data is going to become a lot more important. And then what we're doing down market is, as the chip tracking data improves, as our models start to learn off of chips, we're going to be able to produce that same type of data just off of video. So now what that means is we can take that and scale it down market. So now when you're looking at drafting prospects, you're going to start to look at things like speed. Does speed matter? You're going to look at how much distance is covered in a shift by a player. So instead of just looking at it and saying, okay, we think they go pretty hard for a minute and a half or 2 minutes, they can quantify it and say, okay, they cover this much ice per shift because of the amount of energy that they can output in that time frame. So the data that's going to be looked at down market for draft purposes is going to start to change too, to start to model what people are looking at with that chip tracking data.
So it's kind of going back to like what you said in the beginning. I think we're going to start to see systems and data collections that are actually seeing and hearing, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And like everyone knows that a faster skater is probably good, but it's the context of that. And we're going to be able to start adding context to fast skaters and what that means and how that changes the way that people play and can adjust. So every coach knows that a fast skater is good, but they can't quantify that. And so what we're going to start to do is put some metrics behind, the speed at which players move, the amount of ice that the player covers, and some of the pattern recognition that we can come up with from that data.
My last question, if Jukka doesn't have like 7 last questions like he usually does.
Okay. But I got nothing but time.
We've been talking about the evolution versus revolution. People tend to attach to the data side of hockey the revolution that it happens with the snap. Now it's going to be different than it was yesterday, and from now on it's going to be something like we've never seen before. But actually, would you agree that it's kind of a smooth evolution behind the scenes, that it comes visible, but it doesn't happen overnight? It happens gradually, and then you find, okay, we have been changing the game.
Yeah, I would say it's like an iceberg. You everyone always talks about the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
there is a huge amount underwater that you don't see. And that's the same thing with data. Right now, people are starting to understand expected goals. What they don't understand is there's 40 to 50 data points that go into an expected goals model. So they're actually understanding a lot more than they think, but they're only knowing and seeing the tip of the iceberg. So I do think it will change fast just because there's so much there that once the evolution starts, it is going to go quite rapidly. But it will be done in a natural way because people are going to start to see that they're understanding more than they really think they are.
Do you anticipate that the iceberg, the tip, which is visible, is going to become bigger or more accurate? Probably both.
Both,
yeah.
But I think people will see the bigger first.
Yeah.
They're going to start to say, okay, wow, open my eyes and realize that there is a lot more than I expected. But I think the accuracy is already there. So it's really just the understanding of how much data is out there to look at.
All right.
I have one more question at least.
Thank you.
So looking at the future still, we know that there's not too many differences, but there are differences between North America and Europe.
Yep.
How do you see, what are the things that you think are going to happen in the European hockey compared to North American hockey when it comes to data?
Yeah, I think it's going to grow rapidly. So following, where the NHL was 3 or 4 years ago, I would say that's probably where if you look at Europe as a whole, that's where they are. I think that's going to shift very rapidly, and it's going to grow faster because they now have something to model after, and they have people to look at and talk to really get an understanding of it to move more rapidly. But like I said, the people at the top are very equal. Yeah. It's just the amount of people that are still trying to catch up in Europe is probably more. Yeah. But I don't think it's going to take long to catch up.
Yeah. So it's recruitment more.
Yeah, like it's just understanding and you're right. People still do look to the NHL, and as they see and hear things, and they talk about Sportlogiq and the data that we have, they're going to want to become a part of it because everyone still sees that NHL is what they want to attain and aspire to be. So that only helps us in the process.
What about then, when you talk about video and data per league, it's pretty scattered. So you don't get all the leagues from Europe, right, and things like that.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Will that become to be more like a one, and you get all the leagues from one database or whatever?
Yeah, I think
like that.
We're really at the tipping point of that. We're trying to figure that out because 10 years ago, there was no discussion about rights ownership of video. Video was out there. It was broadcast. If you could grab it, you could use it. And no one really worried too much about what those rights look like. I think then there was an overcorrection where it was like, okay, now we have video, we have rights, and they're worth so much. Well, there's something in the middle that needs to come back to that says, okay, look, we have video, we have rights. And we talked about this a little yesterday. It's the purpose for which the data is being used and the video is being used. So yes, absolutely, there's broadcast rights that need to be recognized and understood. But then there's rights that the team should have just because it's their game, it's their team. They should have that ownership as well to use the data and the video how they want. And right now that overcorrection is still coming back to center a little bit, which, we've worked closely with the NHL to try to get, especially in Europe, there to be some understanding that, yes, your video and your data has value, but the team shouldn't be restricted. And this is our philosophy as well. Teams shouldn't be restricted to what video they can get, just because there's rights that are media driven and TV driven. The team still should have the rights to those video pieces without having to pay those astronomical fees. Because without the teams, there's no video, there's no game, there's no rights, there's no money. And at the end of the day, the team should have access to all the video. And that's our belief is all teams should have access to all video. It's just coming up with a system that people can agree to.
I think it comes down to having those agreements done so that what are the use cases of this data and video and things like that. If that's not in place, then it's too much of a jungle to kind of really make it work.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, as I was thinking about the last two questions both of you asked, I think it has to do with the future and where things are going and how fast it's going to get there. One thing we talked about yesterday, and we tell everybody when we just talk to teams, is today is the worst we're ever going to be. As a company, this is the worst we're ever going to be. And they say, what do you mean worst? We're only going to improve. Data and the ability to understand data is only going to get better. So today is the worst that teams are ever going to be at in understanding data because they're not going backwards at this point. So the future of it is every day. You're right when you talk about is it going to be smooth? It's going to be a smooth transition because it happens a day at a time. But there is a lot more for people to understand pretty quickly. Mm-hmm.
Blaine Patterson from Sportlogiq. It's been an honor having you here. Great conversation. Thank you for coming.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And Jukka, great effort today also.
Thank you very much.
Data and hockey, Dataa and Kiekko will be back on another day with another language. Maybe Finnish, maybe English. We never know.
Let's do German next.
I got some.
I'll be out.
Right.
Going home tomorrow. Perfect.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.